Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just give us one moment, working through some technical difficulties here.
Sophia, are you able to pull in the presenter? Or
Yes.
at least unmute him?
Yeah. I think Ben has to unmute himself.
Sophie, I think if we just go ahead and make it so that the settings are so we can have everyone speak and use their camera, then then that should allow Ben to do so. And we can just mute people as needed if they do come off mute.
Got it. Okay.
Blake, do we know if attendees are able to hear us?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hello. Yeah, our presenter is having an issue connecting to the session. Apologies. Please give us a couple moments. Let's see if we can.
Hi all, I'm on now.
Oh, hey Ben. All right. Good.
Hey all, sorry about that. Not sure what the issue was, but I was gonna wait about 4 minutes to let everyone that's registered join anyway. So we're about at that time. So I'll just go ahead and jump right into the presentation. ICF team, are we recording already?
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. So yeah, more people will probably start trickling in throughout the course of this presentation, but as with all of our other webinars, it'll be recorded and posted on the recorded training library section of the Beam knowledge base for anyone to look back at for future use, or if you weren't able to attend this meeting or if you joined late. And we'll also make all of these slides available on there as well. So everyone will have a chance to look back at them and easily access all the links and whatnot that are in the presentation. So thanks everyone for joining today. This is Ben Goldstein here. I am the Senior Program Manager for Commercial Building Decarbonization at the Colorado Energy Office. And today we're going to be talking about the targets and pathways and the adjustment processes for those as it relates to the Building Performance Colorado program. And I'll also touch at the end on some upcoming potential legislative changes that are currently being considered by the state legislature that would change a lot of the ways that this program works. So that's important information for everyone to have. Oh, and it looks like I am able to do the slides myself. So great. Is everyone seeing this properly, ICF team? Did it move for everyone? Are we on the pathways and targets screen now?
It did not move from. Oh, looks like people in the chat are saying it's moving.
So you can
Oh.
either sync with presenter or just navigate forward, but Sophie, it looks like you're gonna have to just click to go along with Ben.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Sophie, I'll just let you drive then. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, can everyone see the pathways and targets? Okay, sorry about that, folks. Always fun dealing with technical issues. For whatever reason, the state computers really hate Microsoft Teams. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll work on that. So Sophie, I'll just ask you to advance the slide so everyone can be looking at the same thing. But okay, let's start with pathways and targets. So next slide, please. So within the Building Performance Colorado program, and I should mention before I get too deep into it that this is just going to be focusing on the building performance standards element of the program. We've done other webinars on benchmarking and things related to, reporting your annual benchmarking, how to do all that. If there's any questions about that, please either reach out to us or refer to some of the past trainings, and as well as the technical guidance document that we have available. But for building performance standards compliance for this program, there are two main overarching compliance pathways that you can take advantage of depending on what makes the most sense for your building. There is the energy efficiency pathway, which uses energy use intensity as the compliance metric. And there is the greenhouse gas reduction pathway, which uses greenhouse gas intensity, or GHGI, as the compliance metric. A lot of people think that you need to meet both the energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction elements of this, but you actually only need to meet one. I mean, if you're able to meet both, that's even better, but you're only for compliance purposes required to meet either an energy efficiency target or a greenhouse gas reduction target. Next slide, please. So within these two main targets, there's two sub pathways for each of the overarching pathways that you can go through. One is the property type target pathway, and one is what we call the standard percent reduction pathway. So again, this is for both GH opt into a building type, have the property type target for energy efficiency. You will use weather normalized site EUI, energy use intensity, as the target. And if you do the same for greenhouse gas intensity, it'll just be the GHGI target for your specific building's property type. The property type is determined based on the information that you provide in Energy Star Portfolio Manager when doing your annual benchmarking submissions. And a little later on in this presentation, we'll talk about some options for buildings that have multiple use types, or don't have one use type that accurately represents what the building does as a whole. So aside from the property type targets for either of the main pathways, you can do what we're calling the standard percent reduction. And this is a standard reduction based on your 2021 energy use baseline, either for your EUI or your GHGI. And this would mean from 2026 through 2029, you need to meet and maintain a 13% reduction from your 2021 baseline of either EUI or GHGI. And then from 2030 onwards, it'll be a 29% target. And it says 2030 through 2050. That's what's in the regulation currently. This may change, going forward, as with some of the upcoming legislation. We'll talk about that a little later, but these are the main standard percent reductions that you should note and take it or have in your head as the targets. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. I was getting a weird alert on my screen, but I think we're all good. Next slide, please. And feel free to enter comments in the chat now. I'm going to try to get through the whole presentation first. And we will go back to all questions in the chat at the end and leave plenty of time for Q&A, but I want to make sure I get through everything first, since there's a fair bit to cover today. But yeah, please put all questions in the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end. So if you need to find what your property type target is, there's two great locations. Okay, it says slides not displaying. Are people not able to see this right now?
We can see it. I can see it.
Okay, sounds like people are able to see, so sorry for whoever's not seeing them. Might just be an issue on your end. You might want to refresh the presentation, maybe leave and rejoin. Sorry about that. But yes, if you're wondering what your specific property type targets are, it should say so in Portfolio Manager. If you've linked it properly to account for what the state's regulations are, but there's also some existing guidance where you can go back and refer to the tables, and it has the property type targets for both EUI and for greenhouse gas intensity, both for 2026 through 29, and then from 2030 onwards. And so I've linked them here. Again, these links, you might have seen these documents already, but these links will be available and uploaded shortly after this presentation. If you refer to pages 44 and 46 in the technical guidance, it has the table that I'm displaying on the right, the image here, for all the 80 or so property types that Portfolio Manager has. And you can also find the same table in pages 19 through 22 in Regulation 28. And if you're not aware, Regulation 28 is the rulemaking that followed the passage of the initial statute that established the Building Performance Colorado program and the overall targets. And Regulation 28 is the rulemaking where most of the details and specific requirements for all elements of this program were discussed and eventually adopted. So these are the best places to go to find your targets. And thank you for linking that, Blake. Next slide, please, Sophie. And I wanted to mention this pathway selection calculator tool that we have available on the Beam database. And this allows building owners to enter simple baseline information, it's just property type, your estimated EUI baseline or your GHGI baseline from the baseline year of 2021. And by using this, it'll quickly calculate what the targets will be for you as you move forward, both for what you need to meet in 2026 and maintain through 29, and then what you need to meet in 2030 going forward. Should note, this is not the official pathway selection form. I'll mention that in a little bit. But it's rather just a helpful tool to help you gauge what the compliance pathway might be most achievable for your building. So has the property types on the second column, and then the third column is the standard percent reduction. And just another general note on the different pathways that you can select. You're eligible to select whichever ones makes the most sense for your building. The way that we kind of saw things going is that buildings that were further along and closer to meeting their targets are probably going to find the property type target more easily achievable, and buildings that are a little further away from their targets might find the standard percent reduction a little more achievable. But really, you're welcome to opt into whichever of the pathways that you find will be most achievable and best suited for your building's need and financing options and everything like that. Next slide, please. So pathway adjustments, you will definitely not be fully locked into a pathway for the duration of the program. The way we have things set up right now, building owners can easily select their 2026 compliance pathway by July 1st of this year by submitting the compliance selection form, which is Beam, and here use later if you have not already opted into a selected one. Buildings that didn't select their pathway by June 1st, with the reporting, the benchmarking submission that was due last year, June 1st, 2024, they were defaulted into the energy efficiency standard percent reduction pathway, but you have the ability to change this. So you can easily do so by July 1st by filling out the form. You just fill out the form and our team will make the adjustment on our end for you. After that July 1st deadline, you will still have an opportunity to change your pathway. You just need to go through a more formalized process that's spelled out in Regulation 28. So it's just the way that we have to manage the process. So it's just a little bit more involved, but I'll go through everything about that next. And on the next slide, we're still putting together the form for that. We don't want to make this available until after the July 1st deadline, just so people don't get confused. Okay, next slide is here. So yes, after July 1st, you can still change your pathway for 2026 by submitting the required documentation on the form that I was just outlining. The requirements as outlined in Regulation 28 are as follows. You need to be fully up to date on all benchmarking reports to date. You need to submit a third-party data verification checklist for each year of the benchmarking data. You need to provide a list of the property types at the covered building and the associated square footage for each property type. And crucially, you need to provide some documentation demonstrating that the building owner has or will achieve compliance with the newly selected compliance pathway by the target dates. So deadlines for this: the 2026 pathway change request needs to be submitted by January 31st of 2027, and the 2030 pathway change request needs to be submitted by January 31st of 2031. So obviously several years to go before either of those due dates come to pass, but these are some important dates to have in mind if you do ever want to change your compliance pathway. And just one more note on that is that for 2030, you don't have to do anything to change your compliance pathway if you're happy with what you've selected for 2026, and that's the compliance pathway you want to keep on. There's no additional action you need to take or form to submit in order to keep your pathway. Once you've selected a pathway, that'll just remain your pathway until such time that you decide that you'd like to change it, provided you have all the required documentation in hand and submit everything by these listed due dates. On renewable energy requirements, because this is something that comes up quite a bit. And renewable energy, the way that Regulation 28 has been written, is that renewable energy is only allowed to be used in pretty select circumstances. So for compliance purposes anyway. So can only be used by building owners that have selected one of the GHGI targets, either the property type target or the standard % reduction pathway. So in order to use renewable energy for compliance, you need to opt into one of those targets. And you need to, first, it's not listed here, that's my fault, but you need to show that you've already installed all cost-effective energy efficiency measures before using renewable energy to bridge the gap between whatever your building's GHGI intensity is after installing all the cost-effective energy efficiency items. And then you also have to, the building owner has to retain the RECs or renewable energy credits associated with the renewable energy, or the RECs have to be retired on behalf of the building owner in order to be used for compliance purposes. And this includes REC ownership for on-site renewables, off-site renewables, PPAs, power purchase agreements, community solar garden subscriptions, any other sort of renewable energy mechanism that you could think of. So just wanted to give a quick note on what was allowable for renewable energy. CEO will be coming out soon, hopefully in the next month or so, with some additional guidance for this renewable energy, you know, how to determine cost effectiveness, a form for reporting that you've done all cost effective energy efficiency measures before you can use renewable energy. So we're a little bit behind on that, just as we've been working through some of the things that have popped up during this reporting season, but that's something we're hoping to be able to provide in the very near future. Next slide, please. Okay, so we just went through what was the different pathways that you have available to you and some of the requirements and differences between each. But obviously we get a ton of requests about people that don't like where their targets are. Either they're too difficult to achieve, it's gonna be too costly to achieve, you've already done a great deal of work on your building before the 2021 baseline and you're worried about not getting credit for that. So there's a variety of different factors that might lead someone to need a target adjustment. So we'll go through all of the details right now. Next slide, please, Sophie. So there are three main target adjustments, or well, really two target adjustments and one timeline adjustment that we have available for this program. These are the individualized target adjustment, the standard target adjustment, and the timeline adjustment. And I'll go through all of these in depth over the next couple slides, but just to tee them all up, the individualized target is available to a relatively small subset of buildings, buildings that are manufacturing, agricultural, or industrial buildings, or MAI buildings. So MAI buildings are exempt from this program if at least 50% of the building's gross floor area is being used for an MAI purpose. However, if it is an MAI, you have a building that has a large MAI, use in it, but it doesn't cover at least 50% of the building's gross floor area, it is still a covered building by this program, but you're eligible to request an individualized target. This is also open to mixed use buildings. Mixed use buildings for the purposes of this program are defined as buildings with multiple property types where not one single property type meets or exceeds 50% of the building's gross floor area. And there's also individualized targets for specific buildings like cannabis growing operations, data centers, and other buildings without defined building types. Again, we'll go into all the details of this on the next couple slides. So again, that's available only to a smaller subset of buildings, but a much larger subset of buildings are eligible for standard target adjustments. And these are available for buildings of any property type, as long as they are using one of the property type compliance pathways and not one of the standard percent reduction pathways. Again, we'll get onto all the details in a little bit. And timeline adjustments, these are available for buildings of any pathway, have opted into any pathway of any property type and are just looking to achieve their currently assigned target just at a later date than is required by statute. So now, next slide, please. Okay, so individualized target adjustments. As I mentioned, available to a limited subset of property types. I just went through some of them. Right here on the image here is a screenshot from the technical guidance that outlines the different sorts of buildings available to the individualized target adjustment process. For each of these different types of buildings, there's different submission information that's required. For all the property types or buildings in this situation, the building owner must be fully up to date with all benchmarking submissions. So that's the barrier to entry at a very basic level. But then each of them will need to provide a little bit different information based on the circumstance you find yourself in. So, for example, for all buildings, if you have electric vehicle charging stations associated with your building, you're able and allowed to submeter that energy usage and not report it. That's not energy that we want to have impact your compliance with this program. However, if you do have EV chargers in your building and you're not able to submeter it, you can get an individualized target adjustment for this purpose, just with documentation of the EV charging station and their associated energy use. For mixed-use building, which again is a building that has multiple property types, where not one type represents 50% or more of the building's total gross floor area, you will need to submit the percentage of the gross floor area used for each property type within the building, and so on and so forth. So we're still working on getting this form available. We were initially planning on having it this target process open in May, but due to some of the pending legislation that's upcoming, we're going to push this back a little bit, and I'll speak to that a little bit more at the end. But important to note the deadlines here. The deadlines for all of the adjustments that I'm going to go through in the next little bit. For 2026, the deadline to request this is December 31st of this year, 2025. And the deadline for the 2030 targets is December 31st, 2029. So obviously the form isn't available yet, and there's not a whole ton of time left to get everything pulled together for some buildings for December 31st, 2025, which is why the pending legislation that we're going to talk about later is so crucial to keep in mind. But this is the basic information for what's required for individualized targets. And when we release the forms for all of these, we'll do a whole email blast to the entire buildings list in the public on our various websites, CEO, and the form itself will have all the specific documentation that you need to provide for whatever type of building or circumstance that you find yourself in. Next slide, please. So just a note on data centers have a very specific process that they're able to follow to get a PUE, or a power usage effectiveness target. So the regulation 28 has outlined data centers. This is the definition for data center. I won't read it. You can peruse that at your convenience. But this refers really just to buildings that are entirely whole building data centers, not data centers that are smaller, parts or subsets of a building. So just a building that in and of itself is entirely a data center. So there's a whole separate process, as I mentioned, for these buildings to go through. There is a PUE request form that I've linked here that data center building owners can use. And the PUE is just a measure of the energy consumed by the power supply and a cooling system in the data center relative to the amount of energy delivered directly to the IT equipment. So what's needed to be provided here is the facility's total energy use, the facility's energy use specifically associated with the IT equipment, and an ASHRAE level 2 or equivalent audit conducted by a qualified energy auditor showing, what the building's performance is now and where some of the opportunities to reduce the usage and consumption can be found. So that's all that's required for a data center. Again, this is only for whole building data centers, but I just wanted to mention this very specific data center process because we get a lot of questions about how data centers should seek to comply with this program. Next slide, please. Okay, so the standard target adjustment process. Again, this is open to any building owner that has selected either of the property type compliance pathways, not the standard percent reduction pathway, but as long as you haven't opted into the one of the standard percent reduction pathways, you're eligible to get a standard target adjustment. So these adjustments account for a whole bunch of different things, can account for unique building characteristics that make it hard or impossible for you to comply with the target, your property type target as outlined, buildings that have changed a property type due to a renovation or a demolition or anything else, and really a whole bunch of other options as well. It's pretty open to whatever sort of situation that you find yourself in. So there's not a minimum barrier. You can request it for really any reason that you want. Within the technical guidance, it outlines a number of different situations or circumstances that you might find yourself in where you might want to request a standard target adjustment, but really anyone who's not eligible for the individualized target who is going through is reasonable. Obviously doesn't automatically mean that we'll approve the target adjustment, but you can request it for essentially any reason. Again, please note the due dates for these two things, for these 2 years, I should say, same as with the individualized targets. And at right is this sort of information that's required to be adjustment. And just it's a list of the property types at the covered building and the associated square footage for each type. Just need to make sure you're up to date on all your benchmarking data from 2021 onwards through whatever the current reporting year is whenever you go to request the standard target adjustment. This also needs a third-party data verification for each year of the benchmarking data, as well as an ASHRAE Level 2 or equivalent energy audit describing the results and recommendations just to see what's feasible for this building to achieve, where the largest opportunities to reduce energy can be found, and so on and so forth. And Regulation 28 also allows CEO to request any additional information that we might need to generate a standard performance adjustment target. So this will be on a very case-by-case basis, depending on the specific needs or issues with your building. But all the first 4 bullet points will be required for all standard target adjustments. And again, this is going to open in June 2025, very shortly after the current reporting season ends. We just want to get through this reporting season and then start opening up this process, just so people don't get confused and our team doesn't get overwhelmed trying to deal with what I'm sure is going to be a large volume of requests of this nature. Next slide, please. And so finally, we have the timeline adjustment. As I mentioned earlier, this is available to any building owner, regardless of their building type or their compliance pathway selection. This can be useful for buildings that are experiencing financial hardships, undergoing a major renovation, going through a building sale, or really any other circumstance. Again, as with the standard target adjustment, the technical guidance lays out some specific reasons or circumstances you might want to request a timeline adjustment, but there's no real barrier to entry here at all. Really can just for anyone who wants to meet their target as currently provided, but just needs a little bit more time for one reason or another to do so. Guidance is right from Regulation 28. For a timeline adjustment, you'll just need to provide an ASHRAE Level 2 or equivalent audit again, as well as dates and documentation of planned or completed energy efficiency or emissions reduction to upgrades that will allow the building owner to achieve the performance within the adjusted timeline. Essentially, if you say you need until 2032 to meet the 2030 targets, we just need some documentation showing that you're on track or have a solid plan in place to be on track to do that. And then again, we have the ability to request other additional information as we might need. But I anticipate timeline adjustments being a little bit more open and more flexible, again, because there's not a very high barrier to entry there. Next slide, please. So just for timing, again, we're going to have all these forums and the review processes, our internal review processes, fully established and available following the end of this reporting period. So this reporting period ends June 1st, 2025. Sometime that first week of June, all these processes should be available, and you should, everyone that's on our list will get an email letting people know of this. And I also want to note the appeals process. Just because CEO says no the first time doesn't mean that you don't have additional opportunities to try to get your target adjustments. So if a compliance adjustment request is denied by CEO for one reason or another, you are able to submit an appeal to the CEO executive director. And so when you get the compliance, or if you get a compliance adjustment denial request from or email from CEO, we'll link the appeal form there. The only thing that you need to do here, the appeal must be filed within 90 days of the initial denial, and then CEO is required to review the appeal and either grant the appeal or deny the appeal within 120 days after the appeal is submitted. So the details there are still forthcoming. This isn't something we've done before, obviously, since we don't have these target adjustment procedures set up yet. But just to note that if you don't like the response that you've gotten from CEO, that's not the end of the line for you. You are able to request an appeal through our process. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just quickly note some of the programs and resources that we have available, some financing opportunities and grant programs, things of that nature for building owners to take advantage of and defray the costs of coming into compliance with this program. Sophie, next slide, please. I won't go through all of these in depth because again, you can access these either through our existing websites or through these slides when they're posted a little bit later today or maybe tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to get everything together. These are obviously very large files, so sometimes it takes a while to get uploaded to the knowledge base, but all this will be available very soon for you all. So there's a couple different resources to call out. Your utility, whatever your utility is, depending on where you are in the state and who your utility provider is. There's a number of different rebates that they have available for commercial building owners to install large renovations or energy efficiency upgrades, things of that nature. I've called out specifically this commercial building efficiency programs for buildings in the Colorado Springs Utility Service Territory. I've been working with them to learn more about that program, and it seems like a really solid program. I'll skip some of them and go back to them later. There's energy performance contracting. This is only available for public buildings, but for public buildings that do need to meet performance standards or just public buildings that are interested in improving their performance, this allows you to use the value of future utility and operations savings to finance the upfront cost to install some of these measures. So that's a really cool opportunity for public buildings. There's also the geothermal energy tax credit offering, as well as a heat pump tax credit offering. And these are also available to commercial buildings, not just for, especially the heat pump. A lot of people think it's just for residential buildings, but for commercial buildings that are interested in installing a heat pump, you're able to take advantage of this as well, since the tax credits are claimed by the contractor and then the cost savings are passed on to the customer there. I also want to call out the Large Building Decarbonization Program. This is funded through an award that we have with the EPA, and this is to help building owners that are primarily covered by the Building Performance Colorado program that want to meet their GHGI targets, either exceed what their targets are as outlined in the tables that we shared earlier, or to come into compliance well before the statutory deadlines. We're setting up this whole big program that'll provide some additional guidance and funding on how to do that. So as I mentioned, this is still in development. We're expecting this to launch in fall 2025, and so we'll have a lot more details about this available in the not too distant future, but just a little later this year. And finally, I wanted to call out the CPACE program. This is a really great program that I'm not sure a ton of people know about, but is a really great opportunity. So the CPACE program connects building owners with financial institutions to take on, or for the financial institution to offer low interest loans to install large scale energy efficiency, renewable energy, resilience, water conservation, or other similar sort of projects. you're able to, I think, spread out the costs, amortize the costs for either 20 or 25 years, up to 20 or 25 years. So you can really spread out the costs over a long time frame there. And it's a really great program that's open to really building owners of pretty much any type of any commercial building owner, I should say. So it's a really great program. We definitely check that out if you're interested in learning more about that. It's a pretty well established program. It's already helped connect people to hundreds of millions of dollars in financing opportunities. So we definitely check out the CPACE financing program, and I'm happy to talk about that more when we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation. Next slide, please, Sophie. Okay, so I wanted to end by discussing some of the legislative changes that are currently being considered by the state legislature. So this isn't directly related to targets and pathways and the rest of this presentation, but if the bill passes, it's going to change a lot of the ways that this program works, and I think mostly for the better. So next slide, please. So I do need to note right off the top, these changes and many others are still being considered and debated and negotiated at the state legislature and are not yet final. So there's a chance none of this happens. So I just want to make that crystal clear before I start getting too deep into it, that this isn't final, but the legislative session ends on May 7th. So a week from tomorrow, I believe. So we'll know pretty for sure one way or another in the next week or so if this is going to pass and what the final proposed changes are ultimately adopted. So this has already passed the state House of Representatives and is now with the Senate being considered by the state Senate. So it's making its way through. I'm very hopeful that it passes, but nothing's ever done till it's done. So just wanted to note that. But I've linked the bill here in case you haven't heard about this or aren't familiar with all the contents. So what I have listed here are not all of the changes, but I think these are probably the largest and most notable changes. So the single most notable change that would happen here would be making the 2026 target a goal rather than a firm target to give building owners additional time to come into compliance and meet 2030 targets. So with this bill, 2030 targets are not being proposed to change at all. So I don't think that's going to happen, and it wouldn't change what the 2026 targets are. However, it would make it this, like I said, a soft target rather than a firm goal that you must meet or potentially face financial penalties. So should note that. So you'd still want to work towards meeting 2026 targets, but really the ultimate goal would be to provide building owners with additional time and flexibility to meet the 2030 targets. Obviously, this bill was passed only in the last couple of years. Building owners really didn't have a ton of time to come into compliance with 2026 targets. So very hopeful that that passes and we don't have to start, enforcing penalties before people have really had a chance to make the needed changes and upgrades that they're building. I saw a question about penalties. I'll talk about that in a second. Another proposed change would be allowing building owners to use 2019 as their baseline year rather than 2021. If you are able to, if you saved your utility bills or if you have your energy benchmarking information from 2019, you can use this as your baseline year, and we'll set up a process to change your baseline year to 2019 for buildings that want to do that if this bill passes. I think this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, in 2021 was still very much in the midst of the COVID pandemic. A lot of buildings were not operating at normal capacity or were largely or fully unoccupied in that time. So using 2021 as an energy baseline year for a lot of buildings doesn't really make any sense. So allowing building owners to use 2019 instead by COVID. This bill would also allow for deemed compliance for buildings subject to local performance standards. So what this means is that if passed, this would allow CEO to review the exact rules and regulations and targets for local jurisdictions, BPS programs. Many of you are probably familiar with Energize Denver, which is the city and county of Denver's building performance standard program, which is very similar to the state program, but is different in a number of ways. And so this would allow us to review the details of programs like Energize Denver And if we find that what's required by the local jurisdiction is as stringent, if not more stringent than what is required by the state, people would just have to, or building owners would just have to comply with the local jurisdiction and provide some sort of verification of that to the Colorado Energy Office for Building Performance Colorado, the state program. And you would only have to really worry about the local building performance standards. And I think this would be great because it would greatly reduce the administrative burden on building owners that are in, different territories that are subject to both the state and a local building performance standard. You'd only have to worry about one set of targets, and it would also make the program a lot easier for CEO to administer, because there's just that many fewer buildings that we have to actively track and manage, since they'll be working with primarily with their local team. So that would be a really important change as well. This bill would also establish a new enterprise fund to provide additional funding and technical assistance to building owners. This would come with an additional fee. I do want to be honest about that, but it would allow CEO and some of our partners to do some really exciting funding opportunities and provide enhanced technical assistance to building owners, help us hire some more staff potentially to do help out around here. So the exact details of this enterprise fund and the uses would have to be defined following the passage of this bill, if it does indeed pass. So it's still a little bit up in the air, but you should note that this would be a really exciting opportunity as well. And finally, again, these aren't all the changes, but some of the changes that I think people will find most important or most interesting. This would also allow buildings that have a data center as part of the building that don't meet, sorry, that's a typo, that don't meet the mixed use criteria to request individualized targets. So right now there's a lot of buildings that have data centers as part of them. Obviously data centers are hugely energy intensive property types and usage and equipment. And so building owners that have data centers in their building, but the data center or other property use types don't meet the mixed use criteria definition that I had mentioned earlier. If passed, this would allow building owners that have data centers in them to apply for or request individualized targets and kind of expand who's eligible for those. So again, I think these are all really beneficial changes. I'm hoping this bill passes. Again, it's not final till it's final. So just want to again stress that, so no one thinks they can change their baseline year or something now before it passes. But as soon as this does pass, if it does pass, we'll let everyone know. We'll have a whole webinar, probably a couple different webinars for everyone, explaining all these, ultimate changes in depth, and what this means for your building, what this means for compliance with the program. It'll take us some time to parse through everything and come up with forms and systems and procedures to do this. But that would all happen over this summer after this reporting season. Should note that even if this bill does pass, nothing is going to change for the 2025 benchmarking reporting. So you should continue working to submit benchmarking for this year, regardless of what happens with this bill. And we will also, if it passes, do a full update of the technical guidance, so it accurately reflects the legislative changes. So I know that's a lot. There might be a lot of questions about that, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that here, because this does change a lot of things. And for example, with the way the Regulation 28 is written, there's really not a ton of time left for building owners to submit a target adjustment request for 2026. If you haven't done an ASHRAE level 2 audit yet, those can take some time to do. And so I'm hoping this passes. And so even if you're not able to submit something by the by the December 31st, 2025 deadline, you'll have until the end of 2029 to request a target adjustment for your 2030 target, which should hopefully give you, significantly more time to get all the documentation pulled together that you need for that, and really have more time to think about what's available and what makes the most sense for your building.